The year is 1861. America, a nation founded on principles of liberty and equality, finds itself on the brink of a devastating civil war. The issue at the heart of this conflict: slavery. The southern states, heavily reliant on enslaved labor for their agricultural economy, clashed with the abolitionist North, leading to a bitter divide. The southern states, clinging to the institution of slavery, seceded from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. They argued for states' rights, claiming the federal government overreached in its attempts to restrict slavery. This act of secession ignited a firestorm, plunging the nation into a bloody conflict that would test the very fabric of American democracy. From the bustling cities of the North to the sprawling plantations of the South, the lives of every American were irrevocably changed as brother fought against brother in a war that would define a generation. As the nation braced itself for the tumultuous years ahead, the question remained: could the Union be preserved, or would the experiment of American democracy be torn asunder? In the aftermath of the Civil War, a narrative emerged in the South that sought to recast the conflict in a more favorable light. This narrative, known as the Lost Cause, romanticized the Confederacy and minimized the role of slavery in the South's secession. One of the most pervasive myths perpetuated by the Lost Cause narrative is the idea that the South seceded primarily to defend states' rights, not to preserve slavery. This myth conveniently ignores the numerous declarations made by Confederate leaders, both before and during the war, explicitly stating that slavery was the cornerstone of their new nation. Another prevalent myth suggests that Confederate soldiers were inherently more courageous and skilled than their Union counterparts. This romanticized view of Southern military prowess ignores the significant advantages the Union possessed in terms of manpower, industrial capacity, and logistical support. The Lost Cause narrative, with its romanticized view of the Confederacy and its distorted portrayal of the Civil War, served to obscure the true history of the conflict and perpetuate harmful stereotypes about the South and its people. To understand the Civil War, one must confront the undeniable truth. Slavery was not a peripheral issue, but rather the very foundation upon which the Confederacy was built. The South's economy, society, and very identity were deeply intertwined with the institution of slavery. The Confederacy's own Constitution explicitly protected the institution of slavery, making it clear that the preservation of this abhorrent practice was paramount in their eyes. Alexander Stephens, the Vice President of the Confederacy, famously declared in his cornerstone speech that slavery was the cornerstone of the Confederate government, a testament to the centrality of slavery in the South's secession. The lives of enslaved people in the South were defined by forced labor, brutal treatment, and the denial of their basic human rights. Families were torn apart. Men, women, and children were subjected to unimaginable cruelty, and the very humanity of enslaved people was systematically denied. The Confederacy's dependence on slavery extended beyond the economic realm. It permeated Southern society, shaping social hierarchies, influencing political discourse, and fueling a sense of white supremacy that justified the enslavement of millions. Section 4. The South's military prowess: more myth than reality. The Lost Cause narrative often portrays Confederate soldiers as valiant underdogs, fighting with unmatched skill and determination against a larger, better-equipped Union army. While it is true that the Confederacy had its share of skilled military leaders and courageous soldiers, this romanticized view ignores the significant disadvantages faced by the South. The Union possessed a larger population, a more industrialized economy, and a vast network of railroads that allowed for the efficient transportation of troops and supplies. The Confederacy, on the other hand, struggled with shortages of manpower, weapons, and food, which ultimately hampered their war effort. While the Confederacy achieved some early victories, these were often the result of superior tactics or the element of surprise, rather than any inherent military superiority. As the war dragged on, the Union's advantages in manpower and resources began to take their toll, leading to a string of Confederate defeats. The myth of Southern military invincibility, perpetuated by the Lost Cause narrative, obscures the very real challenges faced by the Confederacy and minimizes the sacrifices made by Union soldiers in their fight to preserve the Union. Section 5. The Home Front: Suffering and Sacrifice in the Confederacy. The Civil War was not only fought on distant battlefields but also on the home front, where the absence of men, shortages of food and supplies, and the constant threat of enemy invasion took a heavy toll on Southern civilians. As the war dragged on, the Union blockade of Southern ports began to strangle the Confederate economy, leading to widespread shortages of food, medicine, and other essential goods. Women were forced to take on traditionally male roles, managing farms and businesses, while also caring for their families. The Confederate government, struggling to finance the war effort, resorted to printing more money, leading to rampant inflation that further eroded the already fragile Southern economy. Food riots erupted in several Southern cities as desperation and hunger gripped the Confederacy. The romanticized view of the Confederacy often overlooks the suffering and sacrifices endured by Southern civilians, particularly women, children, and enslaved people, who bore the brunt of the war's devastation. Section 6. The Collapse of the Confederacy, a Crumbling Facade. By 1865, after 4 years of bloody conflict, the Confederacy lay in ruins. The once proud boasts of Southern invincibility had crumbled in the face of relentless Union advances. General Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox in April 1865 marked the end of the Confederacy. The remaining Confederate armies soon followed suit, laying down their arms. The collapse was not just a military defeat, but a repudiation of its ideology. The dream of a slaveholding nation was shattered, and the South faced the daunting task of rebuilding. Section 7. The Enduring Legacy, Confronting the Past, Embracing the Truth. The American Civil War, a pivotal chapter in the nation's history, continues to shape the American identity to this day. It serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of democracy and the enduring legacy of slavery. Confronting the myths and misconceptions of the Civil War is imperative. The lost cause narrative must be challenged and debunked. Acknowledging the full scope of the Civil War helps build a more just